I would like to introduce Marilyn Strickland and let her introduce herself. She and her campaign manager here tonight. And so Marilyn, if you would just like to introduce yourself and let folks know who you are and you know, how you would present yourself to voters, since this is a pool of potential phone bankers here listening.
All right, well, thanks everyone for having me here tonight, and thank you for volunteering to make democracy work. My primary is already started, and August 4th is the last day you can vote. In Washington State, we have mail-in ballots, so they've already started dropping. And I am the former two-term mayor of Tacoma, and I'm honored to be a humanity-forward candidate for many reasons. Number one, I had a chance to talk with Andrew Yang I'd say about a month and a half ago. And what I liked about him was just his down-to-earth approach. And over time, as I've done research about the type of people who are attracted to this particular effort, there really is no one type of person. It is the largest cross-section of people I have seen attracted to any effort, any candidate, and any movement. And I think that's why this is real. When I think about the opportunity to really think about how we remake the economy, this is a big opportunity. And that's why I, along with the other humanity-forward candidates, are excited about having your help. Now, when I ran for mayor the first time, I won by 1,100 votes, and we did not know for 3 days what the outcome was. I want to make sure that I win resoundingly, but it doesn't take 3 or 4 days to find out what the outcome is. With that said, I know this is a competitive race, and I want to make sure that we are enthusiastic, that we show up, and we show people why this matters. Being a humanity-forward candidate is a really big deal because of you, because of your efforts, because of your desire to volunteer. And we want you to be excited about my candidacy and what I want to do in Congress. And here's what I want to do. We have to think about making this economy work for every single person who lives here in this country. And this is why I'm enthusiastic about doing pilot programs across the country for universal basic income. As a former mayor, it thrills me that Michael Tubbs started doing UBI in Stockton, California 18 months ago, and now there are 14 other mayors who've signed up to do this. There's an opportunity to get traction. So instead of just talking about this in Congress, we're actually going to pilot it in markets, see what works, and think about how we develop a national strategy. You all know this. If we have UBI in America, it will address so many of the big issues that we're trying to fix. In addition to that, we know that we need universal health care so that every person who calls this America home has a chance to get access to health care, but also looking at having people's basic needs met. We never imagined that COVID would be here the way it is, and how it is causing a public health crisis, an economic crisis, and then also the social unrest that is based on inequality and racism. I'm ready to go to Congress to work on all three of those things. And I really believe that having been a mayor on the ground with the people for 8 years just makes me uniquely qualified because I have a lens that no one else in this race has. But more than anything, I just want to say thank you for being here and how enthusiastic and proud I am to be a humanity-forward candidate. We're going to remake the economy, but we need to get people like me and the many other candidates into Congress so that we can have a conversation and move things forward. And I'm really excited to be here today. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for volunteering for this campaign. We're going to ask you to dig in and to show up and to make as many calls as possible. But the good news is that when you call, there's a good chance you're going to hear someone say, oh yeah, I'm going to vote for her. Tell me more. And so I think that's a really good opportunity to do some good work and to really think about how we make this a better country that is human-centered. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And thank you so much for wanting to volunteer for my campaign.
Okay, before we take questions, we're going to hear from Marilyn's campaign manager about what we can do to help her.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew. I have the pleasure of being Marilyn's campaign manager. The most important thing to highlight, I think, is that, as Marilyn said, this primary has already started. Even though Election Day isn't for another 12 days, this next Tuesday, the 4th, people have their ballots and people are voting. Washington State is a exclusively mail-in ballot state. So that means that folks have their ballots in their hand right now. So there's a decent chance that you call someone, they could pick up, listen to your conversation, and then just pick up their ballot right away. So these calls really matter, and we really appreciate it. A little bit on the race. There are a total of 18 candidates running in this race. There are 3 Democrats who are viewed as the front runners. Maryland is one of those 3. And this is a top 2 primary state, so it is possible 2 Democrats could make it through. But it's also possible that one of the Republicans in the race could make it through because it's a Democratic leaning district. It's not a overwhelmingly Democratic district. The goal that I have set for you all and for our volunteers is to call 10,000 voters between now and August 4th. We have virtual phone banking parties on Zoom going on every day. I actually updated this on another document. It's going to be every weekday from 5 to 8 Pacific, and then Saturday and Sunday starting at 11 a.m. Pacific. If you would rather make calls on your own, we can also set you up for that. Just reach out to me or to our community forward point of contact, whose name is Dylan and who is also on this call. And we will get you what you need. We'll get you the phone bank link. We'll get you the phone bank script. We'll get you a 1-pager or a 2-pager on Maryland's policy, whatever you need to feel comfortable. We also have a Slack link, which we have included in this slide that Catherine was good enough to create. So you can join us there to keep up to date on new phone banks we're creating, new messages that we're using in phone banking. Yeah, that's the general rule. 10,000 calls in 12 days. We can do it.
All right. Do folks want to ask any questions of Marilyn, kind of find out more about her?
Anything?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. And I really appreciated your intro. It was really inspiring, to be honest. So I just really appreciate you being here and taking the time to let us know more about you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. One thing I forgot to do, and I always forget this, but it's a big deal. So, I had the privilege of being mayor for 2 terms, and I'm running on my record of proven leadership. But if I'm elected to Congress, I will be the first African-American member of the Washington state delegation. And Washington has 10 members of Congress because we redistricted after the last census. We added a seat. And if I'm elected to Congress too, I will be the first Korean-American woman to serve in Congress in U.S. history. And so in addition to moving this forward and really thinking about how we remake government to work for people, we have a chance to make history too. And I think that's pretty cool. And that message resonates with people.
I had a question. So what distinguishes you, I guess if you would tell us a little bit more about the voters that we would be calling.
Sure,
so these folks that we're calling, what is it that makes you the most compelling choice for them?
In December, when I made the declaration to run for Congress, none of us imagined that we would be here in the dead of summer, in the middle of a pandemic, an economic crisis, and social strife based on racial injustice. And here we are. And I would say that having served as a mayor in local government, you are dealing with those types of issues on the ground all the time. So for example, when I was mayor of Tacoma, we helped fund 2 community healthcare clinics, and the city was very involved in that. When the Affordable Care Act would have their renewal periods, I was very vocal in public about reminding people that now's the time to enroll or now's the time to re-up. And so I'd say that dealing with healthcare is not something that is completely removed from me. At the city of Tacoma, we're what you call self-insured, so the city pays for healthcare for our employees, and we were constantly having to renegotiate with our providers. The other thing I'd say that's unique too for me is that if you think about all the things that are happening right now with COVID, the relief packages, the equipment that we need, the relief funds going to small businesses, unemployment, those are the types of things that I had to deal with when I was mayor of Tacoma because I led during the last recession. And so coming out of the recession, we had to do 3 things. We had to invest in workers, and that's why we raised the minimum wage and we did paid sick leave. We had to build stuff, infrastructure, roads, bridges, mass transit. And then finally, we were very intentional about investing in small businesses. And I think sometimes the conversation that gets lost, especially for people of color, is that folks talk about small business or business like it's a bad thing, but a lot of entrepreneurs are people of color and immigrants. And so I think it's important for people to understand that there's a very large diaspora and a very diverse experience that people have. And then finally, I would just say that, for better or worse, when you are a mayor, you have a very intimate relationship with your police department. And I tell folks that, I have been on national television speaking at a memorial service for a fallen officer who was responding to a domestic violence call. I've had 2 police unions demand a public apology from me because they didn't like what I said in defense of a family whose daughter died at the hands of police violence. And so if you think about that type of local on the ground experience, it's having that lens and taking that to DC and knowing what kind of policies can work to help local communities. No one else has that. And so I think those are the things that really, that separate me. And of course, I'm a humanity forward candidate. So there's that.
All right, I'm going to see if Paige can unmute herself and ask her question.
Hi, I have a question. 2 questions actually. One is kind of short. So what is your background before you became mayor? Like what inspired you to get into politics or run for mayor? And then second question, how has your policy shift changed? If at all, how have your policies changed from a local focus as mayor to running for Congress, which is more of like a federal policy?
Absolutely. So those are 2 good questions. So a bit about my background. So before I ever got into politics, my profession was in marketing and business. So I graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in sociology. And then I went to graduate school at Clark Atlanta University, which is historically Black college and university. And when I got into there, I worked at this unknown coffee company I'd never heard of in Seattle. And they were starting to open stores in Chicago and Washington, D.C. And our mantra was 2,000 stores by the year 2000. That was Starbucks. And so my background was in consumer marketing. I worked for an ad agency. And then when there was an open seat on the city council, I was recruited by then the mayor and former Speaker of the House, Brian Ebersol. And he asked me to run for city council, and I was really reticent about it, like most women are. And then finally, I got talked into it, and I ran for council, served for 2 years, and then I ran for mayor because my predecessor was termed out. And I remember when I declared my candidacy for mayor, the newspaper called me audacious. And I ran against a well-known person in the community who'd been there for a long time. Everyone thought he was going to run away with it, and we just outworked them. And so that's why it was such a close race. So my background is in business, consumer marketing, and then I got into public service and really just start thinking about the nexus between business and government and how we can leverage both to help people have better lives and have more economic security. And what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
My second question was, how, if at all, has your policy shifted from local focus to like federal, national focus?
Well, it's interesting because, having been mayor for 8 years and even serving at the Seattle Chamber of Commerce as its CEO for the past 2 years, local communities rely so much on federal policy and federal funding, to be honest with you. And so I think about every mass transit project usually requires a Tiger grant or a Small Starts grant to become real. We had relationships with the Department of Justice to help fund community policing projects. As we're talking about justice and policing right now and the need for body cameras in every single police department, I can tell you that every city does not have the resources to pay for body cameras and the back-end data. But having been a mayor, I understand that we probably have to have grants and funding come out of the Department of Justice to go to every city so that they can at least get it set up. I'd say the other thing I think about too, though, is that they're the really big things that we need to handle. We know that healthcare is going to be driven by federal policy. I believe that building more housing is going to be driven by federal policy. Everything from how HUD, the Office of Housing and Urban Development, needs to play a bigger role, have more vouchers, have more flexibility for those Section 8 vouchers, and look at programs like the low-income housing tax credit that developers can use to actually build more affordable housing. And so I think for me, it's not necessarily a shift, but it's a mindset that I bring because I know what the federal government can do better to help local people. And think about the pandemic we're in right now. We need to extend unemployment. We need to provide more funds for small businesses who've been left out of this. And we need to think carefully about what something like UBI could mean when we come out of this COVID crisis. And then finally, I will say this. People are getting kicked off of healthcare right now because they're losing their jobs because of COVID. Businesses are closing, they're downsizing. And so when people get kicked off of healthcare, what options do they have? $900 a month COBRA? That's too expensive. But if we have a public option and make some changes in the current healthcare system, we can cover more people. And of course, UBI would help people pay for that. So for me, it's a nexus between what we need to do here at home, but how the federal government can play a much bigger outsized role be very intentional about helping local communities.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, this is John in Iowa. I have a question.
Hey, John.
Yeah. What is your view? What are your thoughts on the People's Republic of China, Beijing, China, and its relationship to Taiwan, Hong Kong, its Belt and Road Initiative, and the Belt and Road Initiative in relationship to its military power, and how would we counter that?
Okay, I don't know that I can answer that in 3 minutes, but I will tell you this. When I was mayor of Tacoma, I was very intentional about leading trade missions to China and having a relationship with them. Washington State is the most trade-dependent state in the entire country. So much of our commerce depends on good relationships with China, and that benefits local small businesses. Jobs tied to trade on average pay 30% more than other jobs. With that said, we know that our relationship with China is also geopolitical, it's strategic, and it's military. When I say military, it's no coincidence that we have a strong presence in South Korea. So as I think about the relationships and what needs to happen, we know that mainland China's relationship with Taiwan and Hong Kong has been complicated for a while. They have been promised freedoms to do what they want to do, and you see a crackdown happening. But I tell folks too that, you know, when you have a nation of 1.5 billion people and you have a growing economy that's becoming more capitalistic, then what do we think about when we think about how we can maintain freedom, but be honest about what they're doing there? I'd say the Belt and Road Initiative is really fascinating because it is a very big, ambitious plan to create that transportation corridor for trade that will go from mainland China throughout and travel east. It's expensive, it's ambitious, it's audacious, and it's something that's happening right now. But we can't ignore the fact that the United States and its poor leadership in the executive office and being derelict in its duty around the world is actually emboldening China to be stronger and to do things. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we have to think about this geopolitical relationship, the trade relationship, and how we make sure that our frenemy is someone that we are communicating with and we have a relatively good relationship. Tariffs on products that come from China to the US does nothing but hurt US customers. We have to do a better job of having a stronger relationship. And this trade war does nothing to help anyone, especially a state like Washington, where port volume is actually down by 25% because of our bad relationship with China. So it's complicated, but I'm willing to have that relationship. And I don't know if you know this or not, but I hosted President Xi in Tacoma when he was here a few years ago, when he was on his way to Washington, DC to visit President Obama. He stopped here in Washington State. He spent time in Seattle with the big global companies, and we got him to come to Tacoma because he was in charge of the Fujian province a long time ago, and Fuzhou is the head city in Fujian, and he was actually part of the sister city relationship that Tacoma has with Fuzhou. So I spent a lot of time in China. I'm not an expert, I know a lot about it, but I think that's an important relationship to establish and to reestablish because we all benefit from it.
All right, and then last question, Corey.
Hi there, Marilyn. Thank you so much for being here. My question is about harm reduction, how you frame that, both locally to you and more nationally.
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. What'd you say?
Sorry. Harm reduction, how do you frame harm reduction, both more locally and nationally?
Okay, so you're gonna have to tell me what you mean by harm reduction. I've not heard that.
So doing things just to make sure that people that are most vulnerable are having steps enacted to reduce harm to them, things like UBI, more affordable housing, addressing things like food insecurity, the cost of medicine, things like that. That's how I would frame it, I guess.
So is it a bit like the Hippocratic Oath, where whenever you do a policy, you have to be acutely aware of not inadvertently harming the people that you want to help?
Yeah, I feel like if Robbie was here, that's what he would say.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, I would say that this is really about looking at things from the lens of equity. And when we think about equity, it is often exclusively about race and ethnicity and background and orientation, but it also has to take into effect the people who are struggling and are the most vulnerable. And whether that's housing policy, whether that's economic policy, and like you said, even how we look at healthcare. So for example, when we look at what's happening right now with COVID, we know that African Americans are disproportionately affected by COVID. And historically, we've had a not so good relationship with the healthcare system, not by design, but just the way we've interacted with folks. And so what are we doing to improve healthcare systems so it's actually equitable? And what are we doing, for example, to ensure that the people who may be inadvertently harmed by these changes are included and not harmed by it? So that's my definition of harm reduction, if that works for you, but I've never heard the term before.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to reshare the slides so folks can just see those links. Let's see, present and grab those. All right. Okay, so we're going to share these in our Slack, and we will make sure to share them out to the states. But probably the most efficient way to help Marilyn over the next 9 days is to directly join either the Humanity Forward Rapid Response Slack or the Strickland for Washington Slack. So there's going to be a number of virtual Zoom phone banking parties, weekday evenings Pacific time. So, and then also on Saturdays, Saturday, Sunday. So this is like the 9-day sprint, very doable goal for us. So let's help get another humanity forward, humanity first thinking candidate into US Congress. Thank you, Marilyn and Andrew, for joining us. And we look forward to working alongside you and all the other coalition of volunteers you've built.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. And again, thank you for volunteering your time. There are a lot of ways you can spend your time, and I appreciate that you're going to spend it trying to get me into Congress. So thank you so much.